Welcome to VMworld 2010. Thank you for joining me this morning as we talk about best practices for building an advanced operating model for the enterprise cloud. I work for Computer Sciences Corporation. Just a little bit of background on the company. We have approximately 95,000 employees in 90 countries. Last year our revenue was about $16.2 billion. We're ranked 138 on the Fortune 500. And I work in our tech consulting practice and division, which is about a $3.5 billion division. And I'm responsible for our virtualization and private cloud practice. So all we do is focus on virtualization and helping customers build a private cloud. So what I'm going to go through today is really talk about our approach and our methodologies that we use to help clients realize the benefits of a private cloud, and at the same time helping them develop a strategy that will allow them to leverage external clouds as well. So I'd like to start out this morning with a little joke. This for me is particularly humorous. About 10 years ago, I was a director of technology at a financial services firm that's based here in San Francisco. And at that time, grid computing came out. And we were told, we've got to get a grid, we've got to build a grid, let's get it out there as quickly as possible. And essentially, it was just something that we did to so our senior executive leadership team could go out and say that we had a grid, and it was actually less efficient than the environment that we had in the past. I don't think that's going to happen with cloud. I think cloud is a real alternative, and I think there's a lot of benefits, and we'll go into those in detail. Before I get too far into this, I really wanted to highlight the key takeaways for this session. And there's really four different kind of areas of key takeaways. The first of which is the transition away from being technology focused and having silos of technology, which I'm sure you've all heard that before, and moving to a more service-oriented approach. The second of which is critical success factors. So we have 6 or 7 critical success factors, basically steps that you need to go through to really transform the way that you deliver IT services internally. The next of which is best practices. So I'm going to spend some time going through 8 or 9 best practices that we've used consistently in the field with our clients to help them advance and mature their enterprise cloud environments. And the last of which is best practices for one of the characteristics. So I'm going to go through and talk in detail about all the characteristics and attributes of a private cloud. And one of those I'm going to spend probably about 15 to 20 minutes really doing a deep dive on. There's not enough time to go through all of them, but I'm going to go through one of them in great detail. So with that, one of the things that we like to do, and one of the things that I do within the practice, is we leverage a lot of capabilities and essentially IP that VMware has collected in the field. So if you're not familiar with VMware's Transformational Journey, I would recommend you go out there and search on it. There's Project Colombo, which has a lot of great information. But we leverage this within our practice. And essentially what VMware did is they went out, a SWAT team went out and did an analysis of about 60 organizations and tried to understand why some firms were at 15% virtualized, why some were at 30%, and why some were at 70%. And through that process, they identified a lot of different trends and attributes and characteristics and things that organizations did to excel that journey and to move to a more virtualized environment. Now, from our perspective, delivering a private cloud is much more than just virtualization. There's a lot of different things that you need to do in order to achieve that, and that's really going to be the focus of the session today. But it's really targeted towards organizations that really understand virtualization. You've used it for many years. You understand how to use the technology, what the value proposition of it is, and it's really targeted towards individuals that are in this third stage, which is really transforming IT to IT as a service or a private cloud. Now, one of the things that I'm not going to do, I attended and presented at EMC World a few months ago, and it seemed like every single presentation they went through and they discussed what the difference is between a private cloud and a hybrid cloud and a government cloud. and all these different types of clouds, and I'm not really going to focus on that. We like to focus on helping our clients deliver business value and delivering IT capabilities that allow them to achieve the business objectives. And I'll tie that into this as I go through this session. But really the third stage here, or the third level of this journey, is really around business agility and trying to help organizations align to the business and provide the business with services that they need. Now, one of the things, and it varies dependent upon the individual, where they're at in the organization, but the clouds are coming, and the clouds are a viable alternative today for certain workloads. And with the billions and billions of dollars that organizations are throwing into cloud computing, this, for the first time in history, I think is going to be a real competitor for enterprise IT organizations. And so CSC, we have a lot of cloud offerings ourselves. We have a few sessions later this week where we're going to talk about those offerings in detail and what they are. But the clouds are coming. And for some organizations, based on how the internal IT organization is structured, it's going to be basically providing some competition on where those workloads are going to run. So the current state, and so one of the challenges that cloud providers don't have is they don't have all the complexity and the challenges that most IT organizations have. They basically have a greenfield environment where they're provisioning new servers, new capabilities around automation and orchestration of those workloads. And so they don't have all the traditional challenges that an IT organization has. And it makes it more difficult for IT organizations to really build an infrastructure with similar capabilities. On top of that, there's a lot of organizational challenges. There's a lot of legacy applications that have to be dealt with. And there's a lot of manual processes. And so basically what I'm going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes is how you can take an environment like this and make an environment like this look like a Savvis or a Terramark or a CSC and the services that we're providing from a cloud perspective. So really transforming the IT delivery model for the enterprise and doing it in a way that allows you to leverage external service providers as well. So again, some of the challenges that we've all seen and we've dealt with for many years is around the complexity. Most organizations that I work with, if you look at this run environment on the right-hand side, there's Band-Aids all over it, there's shotgun holes from areas that they've cut out of it, and it's extremely complicated environment. And again, that's an issue that cloud providers don't have to deal with because it's essentially a greenfield that they're building. So these challenges, there's not alignment between the business and IT, and that's really one of the driving factors for cloud. We've all seen those diagrams that talk about supply and demand and the fact that with rigid IT architectures, you don't have that ability to take supply of IT resources and map it directly to demand because of that rigid nature of our architectures that we've deployed in the past. Also, financial transparency. So if you go out to a cloud provider, it's very easy to determine and to understand what you're paying for compute, what you're paying for storage, what you're paying for different levels of operational recovery. And with an internal IT organization, for a lot of organizations, there's very limited financial transparency. So it's very hard for the line of business to understand what they're paying for compute, for storage, et cetera, et cetera. But really the bottom line for most organizations is how are we going to increase our cost efficiencies and align with the business. And so that's really what this session is about. Now the current state, what we found with a lot of clients is you understand in detail things like server consolidation. You've done that, you've been there, you understand the value proposition. You understand things like fault tolerance and high availability. Things like distributed resource scheduling, you understand that. You have structured disciplines internally about resource scheduling and shares and limits and all those other things. Transparent page sharing and all those technical attributes and characteristics that you would need with a typical virtualized environment. But if you're really looking to build an internal cloud, there's a lot of additional things that you need to do in addition to this technology and having a very robust technology deployment. And that's, again, another area that I'm going to focus on today. And so what this is here, and this is kind of our approach and methodology, what we really try to do and what we focus on is achieving the appropriate balance between business efficiency and IT effectiveness. For years and years, organizations, if you align or if you try to provide the business with everything that they need, every flavor, every version, the business wants SAP, you build SAP. If they want this, they build that, et cetera, et cetera. And now you have this massively complex environment that's very expensive to support and maintain. The flip side of that is over here on the right-hand side where you have IT organizations that only have one or two capabilities, and as a result of that, they're not able to meet the needs of the business. And so what you really want to do is you want to achieve this performance zone here where you're providing, the optimal balance between IT effectiveness and also business efficiency. Now, the approach and the methodology, and this is one of the critical success factors, looking at this chart doesn't really provide you a whole lot of value, right? What am I going to do with this? But the approach and the methodology that we use, and something that you can use internally, is looking at all the functional areas that exist within an IT organization and defining the non-functional and functional requirements that you need to deliver in order to achieve this. Now, one of the other things that I want to point out on this slide is that it's aligned to the ITIL process management framework. So there's different levels of maturity. And so a lot of organizations come in and say, you know what, you need dynamic provisioning. Well, your organization, if you only deploy 10, 15, 20 VMs a year, you probably don't need automatic provisioning. That's probably something that's not justifiable for your organization. So in the context of provisioning, the level of sophistication and the maturity that you need to reach in that space is probably fine at a level 2 or even a level 3 in that case. And so what we do as a practice is we've gone through and we've looked at all of those functional areas for an IT organization: service level management, capacity management, configuration management, demand management, all of those different areas, and we've defined specific capabilities from a non-functional and functional capability perspective that the IT organization needs to deliver in order to stand up a private cloud. And we're going to go through that in more detail in a few minutes here. So another thing is, a lot of organizations, as they're moving to a private cloud, they really want to move to an environment that's very similar to running the IT organization like a business. And so this is a concept that we've been talking about for years and years, but most IT organizations still are not able to effectively answer a lot of these questions. Where are my IT dollars going? Why does everything cost so much? Can I get these services at other locations for a better price? Can I get these services from another location with better service level agreements? Can I get these services, basically somewhere else for less? Also, from a line of sight perspective, all the application development teams, most IT organizations haven't developed a discipline internally to articulate the service attributes and characteristics of a service so they can be consumed by the application development team. And also from a cost management perspective, again, there's not a lot of financial transparency. And the reason why I have this slide on here is these are some of the issues that need to be addressed and overcome as you move to a private cloud. So this is a very busy slide. I have a couple slides on this, but essentially these are the characteristics from our perspective, based on all the clients that we've worked with on a global basis, that you really need to have advanced capabilities in order to stand up a private cloud. Now, what these stars are here are just examples of different levels of maturity that organizations have realized through this process. Now, you can see at the bottom the fit-for-purpose dynamic infrastructure. That's essentially all the capabilities that VMware provides and their associated partners from a hardware and software perspective to deliver virtualized resources. And so, again, most organizations in that space, they're pretty advanced. You know how to use the technology, you know how to use and take advantage of things like link clones, etc. But there's a lot of additional things that need to happen in order to really realize the benefits of that. And I have some definitions here that I want to read very quickly because I think it's important that I explain these in the appropriate level of detail. Also, a lot of the organizations that we're working with, they're starting to align their organizations into these groups, or using different names. But instead of having a networking group and a storage group and a security group and a group that's responsible for servers, they're now organizing around either architecture and strategy, design, etc., or around these different domains. The first of which, and again, these are the key characteristics, is service-oriented infrastructure, which provides the IT organization with a consistent method to develop, describe, measure, cost, retire, forecast, and govern all of the infrastructure services that operate within the environment. So that is essentially the charter of that organization. And historically, a lot of organizations have not really focused on that. They focus more on getting the next box out, getting the next server provisioned, or the next storage provisioned. Excuse me. The next area, actually on the bottom, is the fit-for-purpose dynamic infrastructure. And I think I explained that, but it's really provides the IT organization with the ability to align the proper infrastructure resources to the right application workload at the right time based on business policies. So that group and that organization is really responsible for aligning infrastructure resources to the appropriate workload based on business policies. The next of which here is the automated and policy-based management of infrastructure resources. So again, this is kind of the discipline of managing the resources. Provides the IT organization with the ability to automate the provisioning and management of infrastructure resources, ensuring consistent achievement of quality of service targets for application and workloads across multiple domains and device types. So again, instead of having a storage team that just does storage, that focuses on just managing and provisioning storage instances, organizations are moving to starting to collapse those, where they have one team that's responsible for managing the storage environment, the network environment, and all these different domains. Again, there's another one here, which is the real-time monitoring of infrastructure resources and being proactive about it. And again, so the description of that domain or that characteristic is provides the IT organization with the ability to dynamically monitor infrastructure resources and IT services as defined by the service level agreements and the business objectives, or so the business objectives can be achieved. And again, this enables the achievement of quality of service targets. And so essentially, from our perspective and from my perspective, everything that you see on here, in addition to security, which always has to be a part of this, these are really the fundamental building blocks that you need to develop advanced capabilities in an advanced level of maturity in order to realize these benefits. So what I'm going to do right now is, we don't have time to go through all of these in detail. I'm going to go through the service-oriented infrastructure portion of this in much more detail. But before I do that, to explain what these are, so what we try to do is align with traditional IT functions. And so in this case here, you have service-oriented, right? And so that's really about self-service, it's about standardization, it's about governance, it's about having formal, discrete services that you're offering to your lines of business. And again, those really, if you're going to offer services to your business, you really need to start with the fundamental building blocks, which is compute, storage, networking, et cetera, and then you can build applications on that, business services on top of that, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, it's kind of a bottoms-up approach, even though our overall method for basically aligning the business value chain with the digital supply chain is top-down, looking at the business processes and identifying the appropriate place for those to run. The second of which is proactive in real time, so the monitoring. It's really about simplifying it, having the monitoring, the auditing, the alerting, the trending, and the reporting. It focuses on areas like performance management, availability management, problem management, incident management, as well as event management. And then there's automated policy-based management, which again is the provisioning, the orchestration, the enterprise workload management, moving things around based on business demand. And of course, security is always there. So again, from our perspective, and again, most firms have a view very similar to this, that the goal and the objective is to move to the right-hand side, and it's a journey. And again, there's a lot of nuggets that we take from the VMware journey, such as one of the things we use very frequently is the fact that organizations that have been very successful at virtualizing, more than 50-60%, they have a discipline of value engineering built into their program. So they don't just do the TCO and ROI analysis up front. They do that analysis and they carry it through all the way through the program. So every time they get a win, they communicate that win and they articulate that back through the organization so the organization can see the true value that you're realizing from virtualization. So again, moving left to right here, as you move further right, the dependency on things like automation becomes much greater. So it's going to be extremely difficult to realize a full infrastructure as a service or IT as a service or private cloud without having some level of automation in there. And I'm going to go through the automation in the context of the service-oriented infrastructure in detail here. And also the future, from my perspective, there's a lot of organizations out there that are already starting to push workloads out to the cloud. Most, if not all, tech consulting companies have service offerings designed to go in, do an assessment of your application portfolio, and determine good candidates that can be pushed out to preferably CSC. Over here on the right, though, is the method in this approach is really about hybrid, which is really about where VMware is going. And from my perspective, it's really the future of IT. And the future of IT, from my perspective, is aligning workloads with the proper delivery model based on risk and compliance profile of that workload, and also the economic factors associated with where that's going to run. So the first of which, so I'm now going to transition and go through 8 best practices associated with that first characteristic. In this case, this is service-oriented infrastructure. So again, to transform to a private cloud, you have to have services that you offer, right? And so what this represents here is a service catalog. It's an online actionable service catalog. We've been talking about service catalogs in the industry now for probably 10 years. But because of clouds, I think there's a lot of traction in this space now, and it's really a requirement in order to have a private cloud internally. What's really nice about this is this approach. So we're finding a lot of organizations out there, they're doing, and I've heard this so frequently, I almost thought it was an urban legend, that organizations are doing an audit of their internal IT spend or their internal spend to see how many transactions are going to Amazon, and they're finding all of these transactions, they're finding all these network, all this network bandwidth that's going to all of these companies that they're not familiar with. And what's happening is that application developers in the line of business, they're just going out and they're getting VMs and servers and instances from all types of providers. Now, the approach that you can leverage here that I've seen a lot of companies use is that the IT organization needs to control the relationship and the SLAs and everything else that happens between the IT organization or that firm and whatever service provider that is. So in this case here, you can have a catalog and you can build a catalog, an internal catalog of services that you offer, and those services can be hosted internally by the IT organization, and they can also be hosted externally by externally sourced service providers. But this approach and methodology gives the IT organization control of who they're using externally, so the IT organization can set up the SLAs and all the appropriate checks and balances, validate their security, validate their data protection schemes, and all those other attributes and characteristics. In addition to this, a lot of organizations are becoming very advanced, where what they want to do is they want to have questionnaires with structured answers that allow business users and application users, based on their user ID and profile, to go in and ask a bunch of questions, and automatically it will say, okay, then these 3 services are probably appropriate for you based on the number of users, based on the risk profile of that data, based on the compliance profile, et cetera, et cetera. So again, step number 1 is really about building a service catalog. And a lot of the clients that I've been working with recently, that have made a decision to do this, they really decide to do 2 things. They want to stand up an end-to-end service internally, and they want to stand up an end-to-end service with an externally sourced service provider so that they can have their CIO sit down, go through this process, click through this a couple times, have a shopping cart, hit checkout, and they've just, basically did a transaction with the internal IT organization. And of course, you can white label those external services, so the internal lines of business, they don't need to know that you have a relationship with CSC or another service provider. The second thing is you can't have services unless you have at least in my perspective, you can't have very effective services unless you have a service level management framework wrapped around those individual services, right? So the consumers of those services, when they come in to look and procure these services, they need to be able to understand what's the SLA associated with this, what's the uptime, what's the RTO, the RPO, all of those characteristics that you would find typically with service level management. So again, you can do this with internally offered as well as externally offered. So those assessment questionnaires that you can have when you go into the catalog, they can automatically ask questions about the risk profile and the compliance of the data that's going to be used and point to an internal service offering or an external service offering based on the analysis of that data. And again, so service level management is really designed to track, measure, and market the delivery of services that are offered to your internal and external business partners. The next thing, again, here is the next attribute and characteristic of that, which goes back to financial transparency. So you need to have service cost management. You need to have that as a discipline. You don't need to do chargebacks immediately, but the lines of business and application development teams that we've been working with, they really want to be able to see from the IT organization, and they want to be able to consume services that look like what they're seeing at CSE and at Savvis and at Terramark and other external providers. And so in order to stand that up and to realize that, and again, this is another fundamental thing that has to happen from our perspective in order to have a private cloud, is you need to have a service cost management discipline that costs those. Now, one of the things that I use to kind of accelerate building this, and one of the things that you can use as well, is VMware's TCO and ROI analysis. I don't know if you've seen that recently. That spits out like a 200-page report. It has industry standards on sysadmins, fully loaded cost of storage, computes. I mean, you can use that to really develop probably 85%, 90% of your service cost management strategy, and then you just dial it in based on the actual numbers for your organization. So the next thing is a new role, and so a lot of organizations are defining a new role called demand managers that really sits between the IT organization and the line of business. But from a private cloud perspective, you really need to have a new role that's called service managers. And the service manager is responsible for developing all the marketing content around these services, developing the communication and awareness that you now have this portal of services that are being offered. What's the value proposition of it? How can they be consumed, etc.? And they're also responsible for the end-to-end life cycle of these services. So again, best practice number 4 is having actors within the organization that are responsible for working with each of the domain stakeholders to define, create, publish, market, and describe the infrastructure services. Now again, this individual is going to have to work with a networking team, and they're going to have to work with a storage team, they're going to have to work with a server team, they're going to have to work with the application development teams, because where this goes is most organizations, they'll put out 1 or 2 services. And the application development teams love it because now it's very easy to work with IT. They can go and they can have some self-service fulfillment options where they can provision things very rapidly. They can use it, retire it. They can see what they've consumed. There's a lot of things that you can do around, offering this line of business access to $50,000 worth of capacity and infrastructure, and they can consume that on demand. They can do whatever they want to do with that. But also, it forces very structured interactions between those traditional domains that for a lot of organizations, you still have issues with the storage team not talking to the network team. And there's issues now with the Nexus 1000 and all the things. Server admins are doing some of the networking stuff. And with where the industry is going with unified I/O, it's just better to address that and to deal with that and move forward. And so best practice number 5 here is self-service. So again, the more self-service, I guess there was a point there that I didn't finish on that last slide. And that point is that most organizations, once they have 1 or 2 services stood up end-to-end all the way through, there's no reason you can't add a virtual desktop on there as another service that can be consumed, or SAP licenses. And so it just starts the whole process of you didn't have, the structured discipline internally with a catalog of services that were offered to the line of business, and now you can very quickly just add another service, add another service, add another service, and eventually, over time, it becomes the catalyst for change that transforms the organization to an IT as a service, just because you stood up 1 or 2 services. Now, it's certainly easiest to do that from my perspective, leveraging VMware and VMware's capabilities and technologies because of all the advanced automation that has been performed around provisioning and orchestration of those workloads. The next here is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. Let me just do a quick time check here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But this here is about self-service. So individuals feel very empowered, especially application developers, when they don't have to go to the IT organization and go through a 6 or 9 month or 3 month provisioning process to provision a system that they need for dev and test. And that's what's forcing them to go around the IT organization and to go outside. And so providing this capability, similar to a capability that Lab Manager provides, but more holistic, provides them with a lot of flexibility where they can essentially control their own destiny because they can provision things as they need it, when they need it, and they can archive it. They can use the resources for other activities as well. So another best practice, and again, it's one of those things, and you can do this in stages. So a lot of organizations, they build this glorious service catalog that looks really cool. It has all the bells and whistles. But what they don't do is they haven't, worked out all the logistics behind the scene of how they're going to do the automated provisioning. And so behind the covers, they still have this manual process. But they first do that to get that out front to the IT organization. And then behind the scenes, they start to work on these other things. And another thing is service request management. So you have to have and develop some type of discipline around, when you hit, you've got your shopping cart, you check out, where are those tickets going to be routed? Are they manual tickets? Is it an email that happens? Is it integrated with Peregrine or Remedy or some tool like that, and a workflow is developed and that is routed to the appropriate team? And so again, another best practice here, and this is just for one of the characteristics, is to work through the different types of requests that you have from a service request management process. And so here you can see this this example, this use case basically has a gate. Is that a type of service that is a self-fulfilling service? If so, go ahead and just provision that instance and send that client the IP address to log in, and they can start doing whatever they want with that. If not, that work group needs to be assigned to the appropriate team where the engineers can review it to make sure that it's a valid request, etc. And then it goes off to the next gate where it's either approved and rejected. Moving on to the next best practice here, and again, this is kind of an end-to-end workflow. So the next thing is, and again, this can be done, in stages. We recommend that you start with the service catalog up front, but most organizations have done a certain level of this across the environment. They have different levels of maturity and sophistication with regard to how they provision VMs, with regard to how they provision storage. And also a lot of organizations that I work with, we go in and have this conversation. They're like, I can provision a VM in 3 seconds. But from the line of business perspective, the entire process of actually getting to the point where that administrator or that engineer can actually provision that VM, there's a lot of work and logistics that has to be done. And this process here addresses all of those issues and concerns. And so the next best practice here, and the next phase of this workflow, is the automated provisioning. And again, here it's focused on having tools that are capable of provisioning not just the VM, but the storage, the IP addresses, the VLANs, all of those things. And of course, you can move up the stack to where now you have virtual appliances and applications that you're provisioning, multi-tiered applications. And as you get more sophisticated, you can add those new offerings into the service catalog as well. So you start on basic, but over time, you'll become more and more sophisticated as you understand and realize trends that are coming in from the line of business. And then you can build services to address those trends specifically and automate that process. So now if they're requesting, a multi-tiered Tomcat Apache back-end, Oracle database environment, you can have that as an appliance that they can just automatically provision directly from the service catalog. And so you can really start to align to the business much more quickly. And again, there's a lot of additional details within, the time of this session. I can't go through everything, but obviously there's still the service validation process. There's the change advisory board and that gate to make sure that it's operational readiness. You also have the release and deployment management process as that new environment is pushed out into the production environment. And also another best practice, and again, from our perspective, this is one characteristic. This is the service-oriented infrastructure characteristic that's required in order to have a private cloud. So you still have to have that management, which some of that's covered here with the provisioning. You still have to have the real-time monitoring of those applications to move them around based on business demand and associated policies. And then so this next best practice here, provides post-service deployment management that tracks the ownership of the service, records changes to the service, and decommissions the service. So again, it's great to have VMs that are pushed out into the environment. You've automated that process. You've got that service catalog. You've done the workflow automation, the runbook automation to get those things out there very quickly. However, you still have to manage it. And for a lot of organizations, they don't have a lot of provisioning activities that are going on, but what they want to do is they want to look across their landscape, look at the 1,000 servers they have, and they want to say, okay, this one aligns to this service. We're going to classify that as this service, and going forward, we're going to manage it through this process of lifecycle management. So we now know who the owner is, we track it, every change that's made to it. We wrap a service, an SLA around that has certain operational recovery characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. So this is best practice number 8. So the end-to-end use case of what this looks like, and again, if you think about what you can consume from external service providers, this here enables the IT organization to provide a very similar service. And again, you can have services that are white-labeled services from CSC, as well as services that are being derived internally, as well as Rackspace and Savvis and Terramark and all those other providers out there. I think there's like 1,400 providers that are in this space that are aggressively developing services to move workloads that are traditionally under the control of the enterprise IT organization under them. And so again, this is just kind of a shot of that end-to-end workflow, or use case for the service-oriented infrastructure. So in summary on this one characteristic, again, you need to have a catalog, or we're recommending that a best practice or a leading practice is to have a catalog of standard infrastructure services. And once you have that, you can start building additional services and services that are more closer aligned to the business on top of those infrastructure services, but you still have to have those fundamental building blocks that infrastructure services are based on. And again, also, one of the things I talked about earlier was the complexity in the environment, the lack of standardization. If you have consistent services going forward that have SLAs associated with them that are built on reference architectures that are pre-engineered, it makes it much easier to support and maintain the environment going forward. Also, you have the ability to control and govern internally and externally sourced infrastructure services. So we know that a lot of organizations out there, the business is going directly to cloud providers and they're provisioning VMs and instances and compute capacity and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times the IT organization is not aware that this is going on. So if you realize and you've noticed a trend of services that are being used and consumed, you now have the ability to control that and govern that internally by putting those services internally and managing that relationship with that specific vendor. Also, self-service provisioning and re-provisioning of infrastructure resources. So, if I'm a line of business, I'm an application development team, it'd be really nice for me to have the flexibility to fire up 10 boxes when I want to, or, turn those down, or deploy Red Hat instead of Windows this week, or, SUSE, and not have to go through the whole process of contacting the IT organization and getting them to build an image, and is that patched appropriately? If you have a template and a library of all these, they can just go in and select the standard image from the IT organization, build ensembles, stacks of integrated and certified architectural layers, and just provision those and use those on demand whenever they want. And that really drives a lot of efficiency and really provides the business with a lot of agility. Another one is cost of service rendered is aligned with business consumption. So there's a lot of businesses that receive, a bill for 10 million, 14, whatever it may be, depending upon the size of your organization. And there's really not a lot of transparency around what they paid for those services or what they're getting for their money. And so this approach, it's not going to happen end to end, but if you start it now, down the road, as they migrate more and more workloads into this environment, you'll have a very comprehensive set of intelligence around your financial management. From a workload automation and provisioning perspective, if you have a tool that can provision and orchestrate multiple resources, again, that's a major benefit, and it's something that we recommend that our clients look into. And also policy-based lifecycle management of infrastructure resources. So there's a lot of the latest and greatest management tools are now moving to policy-based, where specific policies that are predefined are allowing you to either scale up. So if you hit a 70% threshold, instead of generating a tier 2 alert that goes to the service desk, just fire up another VM and another instance of that and go out and tickle the load balancer and tell it that it's got another engine that it can start firing transactions to. In addition to that, you've got to have that dynamic scalability, that orchestration and elasticity of infrastructure resources, which is really provided by vSphere 4.1 and the associated technologies that VMware provides. And then on the bottom of that, again, you've got shared resource pools. Again, if you go back to the journey, a lot of organizations, and I still see this quite frequently today, is they've gone in with virtualization with the exact same approach that they went in with the physical environment. So what they do is they have VMs, either small, medium, or large. They have set and defined sizes for those. And even if they only need a half a CPU, they get 2 CPUs and X amount of memory. And it really defeats a lot of the value of virtualization. And there's no sharing. So every organization, this line of business has their own, this line of business has their own, this line of business has their own. That's very difficult to manage. And again, it really goes back to that communication and awareness. You've got to educate the lines of business on this technology, how to use it, the value proposition that it brings to the business as well as to the IT organization. So very quickly, the business benefits. Again, so misalignments that happened in the past. This approach in building a private cloud, I think we can all agree that misalignment that caused friction historically, now that they can provision their own instances, they know what they're spending. It's much more aligned, the IT organization. Economics of it, so now you have IT cost transparency. In the past, you had a disproportionate IT spend on maintenance versus innovation. Most organizations, that's still at 85%. This approach and methodology will really allow organizations to flip that over to more of a balanced mix between what they spend on maintenance versus innovation. And also from an agility perspective, time to market, again, low resource utilization, all of those traditional things that virtualization has addressed. And also from a service delivery perspective, if you have very structured SLAs and a service level management framework that's wrapped around all these services that you provide, you're going to have a much more consistent quality of service environment, as well as all the traditional defects that generate from manual processes will be eliminated. And then obviously the IT benefits, these are very consistent and traditional with virtualization, reducing CapEx and OpEx, anywhere from 40 to 70%, increasing infrastructure utilization to 70% or beyond, reduces the complexity, and also increases the supportability of the environment. And lastly, streamlines and automates inefficient, error-prone processes. A lot of organizations, they've had to throw bodies over the years at the complexity, and moving to this automation, to this level of automation where you have structured services, really allows the IT organization to move higher up the stack and start providing more strategic services to the business. And again, so this is my perspective of what the future is. I think we're just now seeing the start of this. But, there's a lot of industry analysts out there and others that have claimed that, by a certain year, 50% of workloads are going to be, operating outside of the enterprise. And I think that is something that's going to happen. Most organizations that I work with right now are in the process of developing a strategy to determine what applications are critical and core to the business and what's essentially a commodity, and whatever is a commodity, they're just going to push that out and let someone else run that. Email is a great example of that. But the future of workload, or the future is workload to delivery model alignment. So you've got this workload. Can the IT organization run that cost effectively, or can an external service provider run this workload more cost effectively? And I think if you transform your organization to more of a service orientation into a private cloud, there's, you're going to have an opportunity to have more workloads being offered internally. So we have a couple additional sessions this week that I'd like to highlight. We have Siki, our Global Vice President of Cloud Computing, is presenting later in the week, as well as our Peter Allen, our Vice President of Global Sales and Marketing, later in the week on business transformation, kind of the top-down approach, where we align the business value chain with the digital supply chain and talk about our processes there. And also, I'd like to remind you about the online evaluations. This year, first time, they're not passing them out in the chairs, but I'd appreciate it, and I know VMware would appreciate it as well, if you take a few minutes and fill out the evaluation forms. Also, I think we have 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to field those. If not, enjoy the conference and stop by the CSE booth if you'd like to talk more about any of the things I covered this morning. And thanks for your time.